The use of animals in the circus has sparked a widespread topic of conversation. Many countries are taking the initiative to ban the use of wild animals in the ring. While this is a step in the right direction, it leaves the fate of current animal residents unclear. This was the case for one bear who was living at a circus, held in a small concrete enclosure their whole life. When one rescue group heard about this story, they wanted to set this animal free. What they didn't know was that they were about to start a serious battle. A bear named Napa spent his whole life only knowing cages in concrete. Although he was originally born in a zoo, fate had other plans in store for the poor bear. Napa was sold to a Serbian circus, called Corona, at a very young age, where he was forced to perform tricks in front of a very large and loud crowd. It's unclear exactly what life at the circus was like, because in 2009 Serbia banned the use of wild animals in their shows. Since the circus no longer needed him, he was forced to spend his days in a small cage. Four Paws, an international animal welfare charity that focuses on sustainable solutions for wild animals in need, heard about Napa's conditions and just had to take action. Volunteers knew they needed legal help in order to relieve Napa from his inhumane life. They sought aid from local officials, but they also knew that the odds of rescuing him were slim indeed. Finally, in October 2016, Four Paws and local officials were able to confiscate Napa from the Corona circus grounds. But due to lack of long-term facilities, Napa had to be placed in temporary holding at the Palić Zoo in Serbia. It wasn't until early July 2018, nearly 2 years later, that Four Paws was able to provide Napa with a permanent home. A home that could provide him with the best and most natural life possible. Rescuers worked tirelessly with the Arosa Bear Foundation, the founder of a brand new bear sanctuary located in Switzerland, to complete the mission. Napa was going to become its very first resident, but the journey to bring him home wasn't going to be easy. Veterinarians sedated him and then transported Napa to the bear ambulance, where he would travel for 28 hours and nearly 870 miles by van and cable car. Traveling to his forever home, Napa was provided with an air-conditioned ambulance and had scheduled veterinarian checks along the way. He was in the last leg of the trip when rescue crews ran into a slight problem. They needed to figure out how to transport Napa's 1,200-pound crate from the ambulance to the cable car. Napa had come so far and the crew was not going to give up. Bear expert, Karsten Hertwig, at Four Paws said, transporting him from the bear ambulance to the gondola was a logistical masterpiece. I am very happy that everything went so well. Napa's rigorous trip was complete when he had finally arrived at the Arosa Bear Sanctuary in Switzerland on July 4, 2018. He was placed in an adaptation enclosure so that he could see his new home without being overwhelmed. He was provided with lots of love and treats consisting of fruits, vegetables, and meat. He was also showered down with a hose, a first for this bear who had been neglected for so long. As Napa looked around, he was curious and finally at peace in his new home surrounded by the breathtaking Arosa Mountains. In no time, Napa was comfortable and ready to be released from his adaptation enclosure. Napa stepped out to explore his new home, which provided over an acre of land just for him. The sanctuary was filled with slopes, trees, and ponds for his enjoyment. Something that Napa now loves to do is go swimming in his own personal pond. He can be seen entering the pond and then joyfully splashing around below. The Arosa Bear Sanctuary officially opened in early August of 2018. It is a 3-hectare site containing species-appropriate enclosures and room for up to 5 bears. Napa and the other bears have given the Arosa Bear Foundation hope. Their sanctuary offers visitors and tourists a place to become educated on animal welfare and nature conservation topics. Although Napa's life did not start out under the best conditions, he has helped shed light on the necessity of species-appropriate sanctuaries for animals like him. He was a success and now, he's finally free of his cage and home for good. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. Crab fishing is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Skilled crewmen battle frigid temperatures and rough seas, all so we can enjoy those tasty crustaceans when we go out to eat at a fancy seafood buffet. Fishermen literally put their lives on the line for our appetites. When crab fishermen set sail, they expect to encounter plenty of different sea creatures in their quest for crabs. However, as one Canadian fishing crew found out, sometimes an average day on the job can turn out to be anything but normal. Mallory Harrigan and her boyfriend Cliff Russell, two crab fishermen from Labrador, Canada, woke up early one morning to set sail from Williams Harbor to go crabbing as they often did. On this particular day, however, they were going to encounter something that was unlike anything they've ever seen. Mallory, Cliff, and the rest of their crew spent several hours loading their ship with the appropriate equipment. After everything they needed was stored securely in their vessel, it was time to set sail. During this particular time of year, the crabs were thriving on the seafloor and catches were usually plentiful. The job was tough, the hours were long, but it was always worth the effort in the end. The team was prepared to take on a massive haul. They were used to returning to town with thousands of crabs. But, little did they know, it was a much different kind of cargo they'd be hauling in by the time they returned to shore that day. The boat was slowly drifting through the harbor, and the crew was laughing and telling stories of past ventures. There were hundreds of small ice chunks floating around them, but it didn't concern anyone on deck. The ship was designed to break through on the frozen obstacles. The ship was a few miles off the shore when the crew noticed a flurry of seagulls that seemed to be circling one particular chunk of ice. Naturally, the crew had to sail closer to see what all the commotion was about. From a distance, the crew could spot a small grayish animal on a piece of an iceberg. Naturally, the crew assumed it was a seal, as seals were prevalent around the harbor. But, with all the chaotic energy the seagulls were displaying, they weren't so sure. If the animal was a seal, it would have gotten in the water to avoid the seagulls' frantic wrath. A crew member slowly pulled the boat up to it, and the entire crew had a sudden and stark realization. There, atop the ice and completely stranded, was an Arctic fox. The poor thing was cowering and terrified. He watched the ship approach with a desperate look in his eyes. How did he end up miles away from shore? The crew assumed the chunk of ice the fox was stranded on was originally attached to the shore, but it broke off while the animal was attempting to catch a meal. Now, it was time to step in and rescue the little guy, but how? The fox was sitting too far in on the iceberg to reach by hand, so the crew rammed the front of their ship into the ice and broke off the chunk the fox was resting on. As soon as he fell into the water, they scooped him up with a net, but was it too late to save his life? The fox, having no idea the crew was actually trying to save him, fought long and hard with his rescuers. But he eventually tired and the crew brought him on board. Once there, they placed him in a makeshift bed so he could warm up and gather strength. However, he was so frail the crew didn't know if he would survive the journey back to shore. Arctic foxes are normally brown in color, but this one was in the cold for so long nearly all of his fur turned white. Things weren't looking good, and everyone on board knew it. For the first few hours of the trip back, the fox refused to eat any of the crackers the crew placed on his bed. Then, one crew member had an idea that changed the animal's entire demeanor. They gave him a can of Vienna sausages, and what a difference it made. The fox perked right up and ate the snack like it was the first meal he'd eaten in days, and it very well could have been. Not long after he finished, the crew pulled ashore, and it was finally time to say goodbye to their new furry friend. The fishermen gave him a few more morsels of food to hold him over, then they left him in an old abandoned doghouse where he could shake off the harrowing ordeal. The crew prayed he would run off back into the wilderness, but he wasn't going anywhere too quickly. The fox seemed suspicious of his surroundings initially. He peered his head out of the doghouse and surveyed the land, making sure the coast was clear for him to head back into his habitat. Then, he darted up the hill and was gone. He had Mallory, the team, and a stomach full of delicious sausages to thank for his renewed strength. The crew headed back home, more than satisfied with their day's work. The crew never ended up catching any crabs that day, but what they experienced was so much more meaningful. If it weren't for Mallory and the rest of the fishermen, the fox would have faced certain death. Mallory said she still sees the fox exploring the coast of Williams Harbor from time to time, and it always brings her back to that special day at sea. Sometimes, when you expect your day to turn out one way, it takes a completely different turn.